Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, we are talking about the best non-engine to play in the current Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel ladder format. Let's just quickly get the elephant out of the room. Maxi, that's it. Yeah, we all know Maxi, right? You gotta plan around it. However, that being said, Malice and Ryziel are the two decks to beat, so take that into consideration when talking about the rest of these cards. A lot of these as well are almost exclusively side deck options, so we're not really going to be talking about them, like for example Mistaken Arrest and Shared Ride, just not really worth playing in any capacity in a side or in a no side deck format. Same thing with Ixie Encore, same thing with Spellbound. Like these are just options that are not realistic, right? In a non-side deck style format. So yes. Let's just quickly hop into, this, why is the Nibiru not the good Nibiru artwork? Why are we using alternate artwork? Don't use alt arts. Use the OG artworks. That's all. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Yeah, let's just get the elephants out of the room. 99% of decks are going to likely play Maxi called by Ash to deal with specifically Maxi. It is that problematic of a card. It is in so many decks, and genuinely speaking, if I could, I would cut Ash Blossom. If I could, I would cut even Called By. No, I'm lying to you, Called By is insane. But at the very least, I would cut Ash, because genuinely speaking, I think this card is really terrible right now. However, it is exclusively in here to deal with Maxi, and even the Fuwas and stuff like that. But even with that being said, like, you can play around Fuwas a lot more than Maxi. Ash is just not good right now. It just doesn't do enough. It's not advantageous to trade 1-for-1 right now against Ryziel and Malice. They both are just not great at trading that, or at like the 1-for-1 trades with like Imperms and Veilers and Ashes and stuff like that. It's not like Snake Eyes where it's like you have to stop the combo or they just generate too much advantage and you're never going to be able to kill them. It's a lot more about like hitting them with big power cards, Drolls, Nibirus, Lancias, etc. And then like playing through their weakened board. So there's that. Next up we have Dark Ruler. You could maybe play as a go second option in like non-Tenpai build of going second. Theoretically. Even then, I really don't think it's worth it. Impulse. Impulse is fantastic if you can play it. You're not realistically going to play it unless you're playing something like Malice or like, I don't know, something else that's almost exclusively dark. Labyrinth, I guess. For the most part, it's not great. But if you can play it, it's extremely fantastic. Droll. Droll, I think, is okay. Here's the thing with Droll. Droll is, like, fantastic in Malice due to the fact that it's very good at dealing with Maxi, Fuwalos, etc. And it allows you to play... it allows you to stop Ryziel kind of dead in their tracks. Not entirely, but, like, more or less, which is very, very nice, which is why I think it's a solid option. However, it's also not good in Ryziel, and it's also not good in a bunch of other decks that also want to surge a whole bunch. But you can play around Droll with, like, the Fiendsmith stuff, or with the, I don't know, whatever other cards you want to play that play around Droll in Ryziel. So there are options for it, but I don't think it's like an auto-include. Veiler is probably only going to be played in specifically Blue Eyes, and even then it's not great. It's more of like a search target. It's not really worth playing. A lot of decks can just ignore it pretty much entirely. So there's that. If you are going to play some sort of targeted effect negation, I do think that Imperm is a little bit better due to the fact that, actually it's a lot bit better due to the fact that, yes, there are still applications for targeted effect negation, but specifically making it a non-monster effect negation is pretty important because of things like Called By, because of things like Triple Tack, which are also very good, and because like 1-for-1, as I've previously mentioned, is not very useful. Being able to like Imperm a guy can be okay, but it's also not like exceptional. You generally want to pair it with something else, which means it's not great to play additional 1-for-1 cards. Speaking of which, Ghost Ogre or Ghost Mourner is just not very useful. Ghost Ogre, on the other hand, I think is extremely advantageous right now for a few reasons. First and foremost, it deals with the Duo Drive in particular extremely well. The opponent makes Duo Drive, you Ghost Ogre the Duo Drive on activation of it, and then it goes away. On top of that, it can deal with things like Cross, right? Ryziel Cross is very useful. But it also has application against Malice as well. If Malice goes into a Link 2, you can pop the Link 2, and now they're out of additional materials, which means that they either need to have normal summon available to them to continue plays, or they need something like another extender, such as a Bestial or a March Hare or something like that, in order to actually do their plays. So it can really significantly hinder them, especially if paired with another hand trap, like that of an Ash Blossom or something else of that nature. So it is pretty solid, all things considered. It's one of the few cards that isn't necessarily a strict one-for-one trade, because you can trade it up very much, especially with like Duo Drive. Winter Cherries is... I think there is merit to playing something like Winter Cherries, because in something like Vanquish Soul, you would be able to just kind of remove the options from the opponent, removing Detonator, removing Duo Drive, removing White Binder, etc., while still getting access to some use to it. On top of that, anything else that would not necessarily need to play a extra deck, or like a lot of extra deck monsters, that makes it pretty useful. So I think there is merit to it, but it's not great. Lava Golem is pretty bad right now. I think a lot of decks really need their normal summon right now. That's pretty much it. On top of that, there's not a whole lot of decks that end on specifically 2 monsters. They can end on 2 monsters, but they can also end on like 1 monster or 0 monsters and still have a lot of gameplay. So I don't think it's necessarily great right now, mostly because of the removal of your own normal. I don't really see a deck that wants to play this in any capacity. Lightning Storm I actually think is pretty solid, mostly due to the fact that if you are playing a going second option, it's actually very advantageous to have some sort of removal of Backrow. I think Backrow is extremely powerful right now. Yeah, mostly due to like Malice having a bunch of Backrow, as well as Ryziel having a fair amount of Backrow, and being able to deal with the Backrow means that you basically only have to deal with Detonator in that, or the monsters, which are a lot easier to deal with if they're not backed up by things like Plugin, or things like GWC, or something else of that nature. Realistically, I don't think that having Anti-Spell Fragrance is very good right now. There's not a lot of spells that really matter. Arguably, Malice has a few spells that, like, do really matter. And same with Ryziel. But most of the time they can play around those, so it's only going to do something occasionally. So I don't think it's, like, an auto-win. And because it only works going first, it's pretty bad. As is the case with a lot of these Floodgates, Ghost and Match is really bad right now, because yes, locking opponents into one specific attribute is okay, but Malice doesn't care. Same thing with the different dimension ground. Malice doesn't care, so it's like only good against half of the decks in the format. If that, all of the viruses are pretty bad because they only hit like some decks, and it's very niche that you're going to be able to even apply them. So there's that. Like, calling spells right now is okay. Calling traps right now is okay. There's not really a deck that, like, auto loses to just losing their spells or losing their traps or something else of that nature. And then, like, the destruction effects are only okay as well. Theoretically, like, you would be able to, I think, use whatever this one is. I forget exactly the name of the virus. To deal with, like, Ryziel. But then it doesn't deal with Malice, and vice versa. So it's very, like, oh, you could hit one deck, but you can't really hit both. Which makes it really meh. Bestials. I'm just gonna mark them as just Bestials. Bestials are okay. I think, for the most part, they're not great, because, yes, they still deal with, like, the Fiendsmith stuff, which is nice, but they don't necessarily deal with any of the Ryziel stuff. Like, who cares if you banish a Ryziel? It's not exceptional. And it's only okay against Malice as well, because if Malice didn't end up banishing a guy, and now you want to, like, banish the thing, it's not really going to do anything. Like, for example, if they go into something like Splash Mage to, like, target a Dormouse that they normal summoned and didn't end up banishing it, banishing the additional guy is not really going to do anything, because it's just going to give them the body anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. So for the most part, like, it's okay. It does have applications. There are, like, Malice hands that activating a Bestial to banish the guy is pretty advantageous for you, where it just kind of, like, cuts off the Malice name, which can be pretty nice. But that's pretty rare, and it doesn't really do anything against the other decks. But it's nice also as well to just, like, put a guy on field and have a Searcher, right? So that's pretty strong. Again, like, in Tenpai, you still play Magnuma, and you still play a few other cards as well. Change of Heart's not really worth playing right now. Just no real good applications. I think, like, in theory, you could target a Detonator and stuff like that, but then it's only good going second. And there are more applicable cards like the Triple Tack. Triple Tack I actually do think is a fairly solid option, as well as Triple Tactics Thrust. I think there's a lot of very solid power spells right now, so the Triple Tack options are fairly solid as well, and being able to, like, steal a Detonator or being able to steal, like, an Apo is fairly solid. On top of that, being able to just, like, look at the opponent's hand going first, or draw 2 cards or something along those lines is also very solid. So for the most part, Triple Tack's nice, but it's not insane. Dark Hole's pretty terrible. Droplet's also fairly solid. The problem that I have with Droplet is there's not really a deck outside of Memento, I would imagine, that really wants to, or, like, doesn't mind sending cards to the grave, right? Malice does have enough cards to just send, but for the most part, you'd rather be playing hand traps in Malice. And Ryzeal, while it does have a lot of merit, like Droplet is fairly decent against Ryzeal and against Malice. It's also not great to be played in Ryzeal because, while yeah, being able to have, like, a board breaker is nice, you just kind of need the most cards you can, and being able to just, like, send a card to the graveyard is not consistent, right? It means you probably drew, like, a dead Fubuloss or, like, a dead Nibiru or something like that, as opposed to something that would actually have done something, which is not exactly a great option for Droplet. Most of the time, you just want the extra bodies, right? Ghost Spell. Ghost Spell is also it's an okay option, mostly due to the fact that being able to negate something like a, what am I thinking of? Like a Splash Mage or something else of that nature that wants to interact with the graveyard is pretty consistent, right? It's not like you're not going to have the ability to interact in some capacity in that with that, right? So that is something to keep in mind. It is a pretty solid option, but again, it's that idea of, like, trading 1 for 1, which isn't exactly great. However, this can really cut off some important notes, right? Especially in Malice. The Lance and Chalice are pretty bad. Same thing with Warning, as well as pretty much the entire Solemn Brigade. I wouldn't imagine, like, any of the Solemns are very useful. Rivalry is okay as well, except it's mostly okay into Ryzeal, but it's, again, pretty bad into Malice. That is kind of the dichotomy with a lot of these Floodgates in particular, is that, like, oh, this Floodgate does really well against this deck, and is really terrible against the other one. So that's something to keep in mind. Super Poly's not great. Again, another situation where it's pretty good against Malice because you can, like, fuse away pretty much any of their boards very effectively, and there's not a lot of repercussion there. But against Ryzeal, it's a lot more difficult to actually fuse away the board. So there's that. Lancia. Lancia is okay. Lancia is not something I would auto-include because it's similar to a lot of cards right now where it's very good against Malice and very bad against Ryzeal, and a lot of other things in particular, right? Malice is common, but not common enough to where you can auto-include this card and immediately just have, like, a winning matchup against this deck. It is not something that is going to be everywhere. Malice is consistent enough to where you'll see it every, 1 in every 5 games or something of that nature, even more sometimes, right? But it's also one of those things where it's like, you're not always going to see Malice. You're not always going to have to deal with it. and it's pretty terrible against, like, everything else. Like, what does it do against Ryzeal? The answer is nothing. Literally nothing. What does it do against Fiendsmith? Nothing. What does it do against Memento? Nothing. What does it do against... The list goes on, right? So it's just, like, really bad against those. This has the same problem with the Lava Golem. It's like, most decks need their normal. Like, really need their normal. So, it's not great. I think there is a purpose to playing Dimensional Barrier, especially against Ryzeal, but it's also terrible against Malice, once again. However, it is also very good in any sort of trap deck right now, just due to the nature that negating and preventing the special summons of Xyz is pretty powerful. So I don't think it's terrible, but it's just not widespread. DD Crow has some merit as well. I think if you're able to search it, like going into the Literalist rank 1 is not terrible, and having access to the DD Crow to potentially banish targets for Malice, or being able to banish like spell trap cards or something like that, it's okay. I don't think it's terrible, but I also don't think that it has like the greatest of applications. Gamma, I actually think is pretty solid right now. This may seem strange, but the simple fact of the matter is monster effects are king right now. And being able to negate monster effects is also very nice. So having access to some sort of way to benefit off of a Gamma is very solid as well. And it's just like a solid option generally. Yes, it is limited to 1. You can play it alongside something like Delta or the trap card negate, which is not a terrible option. But for the most part, Gamma itself is pretty solid. And you could pair it with something like the Droplet to kind of pair with if you draw a driver. That way, at the very least, you have the ability to send to the graveyard the driver to use the Droplet. Book of Eclipse is not terrible, except for the fact that it's terrible against Malice. I'm also going to put all of the Max, or all of the C archetype pretty much in no outside of Maxi, because of similar reasons, right? It's like, oh, one's going to be very good against Ryzeal, and one's going to be very good against Malice, and the other two are going to do absolutely nothing against the other. So, yeah. Kurikara. The thing with Kurikara is that it requires the opponent to have activated the monster effect on field for you to then have to be able to treat it, which is pretty good against Detonator and is very bad against Malice. Once again, that being said, it's not terrible against Malice, because if they make Apo, which they should be doing, if they make Apo, you can just send away the Apo, which is very solid. So at the very least, it's not terrible. And I do think there are reasons to play it. I don't think it's great, but like in like Vanquish Soul or Snake Eye variants or something like that, you could realistically play them. Next up, Econ. Econ's not really worth it. Being able to take a guy is nice, but you do have to target, which isn't great. And there's not a whole lot that you could take while being able to like tribute and get any advantage off of it. I guess you could potentially dodge like a destruction effect of a like a detonator, which is something. And then you could maybe seal the detonator, except for the detonator could just chain and then pop itself, and then you plug in, and then it's okay. Actually, you know, I'm gonna put it in niche. I don't think it's terrible. I think there are applications for it. If you're playing more of like a go second build, it's fairly decent against the Ryzeal end board, and it's not terrible again into the Malice end board, because again, being able to like yoink a guy is pretty solid. So there's that. Skullmeister is just terrible right now. There's not a whole lot of effects that activate in the grave, and it only really interacts with the activation of the grave. Harpy's Feather Duster is... Oh, sorry, that's not the right one. Sorry, I want to talk about Harpy's Feather Duster. Harpy's Feather Duster is another solid option similar to that of this guy, as well as Red Reboot, which is not currently listed here, but holds a similar purpose. So there's that. Let me put the Solemn Brigade in there. Phantasm is actually pretty solid as well. Mostly due to the fact that Malice is as common as it is, means that this is live a lot more often than it's not, which is pretty solid, and there's a ton more Link decks than there are pretty much anything else. Only Ryziel really doesn't play Link monsters, so there's that, but pretty much every other deck is going to play some sort of Link monster, and you're going to generate a fair amount of advantage. And being able to see those additional cards is, again, pretty solid. That being said, it's not the greatest. Maybe I should put it down more into niche. Yeah, we'll do that. Purge is a fantastic option, is always going to be a fantastic option. If you can play it, play it. Evenly Matched is actually very good right now. Yeah, we'll put it here. Evenly Matched is very good right now. Not a single deck really has a great out to the Evenly Matched. So there's that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, being able to, like, leave the opponent on Detonator isn't exactly great, but there are a lot of other options to deal with something like Detonator. So, in tandem with something like Evenly Matched, it can be fairly solid. On top of that, Malice just gets, like, hard cooked by this unless they go for Terahertz, which is not great in and of itself, and probably at that point they would have won anyway, unless you specifically are playing, like, board breakers. So, Book of Moon is pretty terrible. The Kashtira monsters. Where do I put the Kashtira monsters? That's a great question. I'm probably going to put them in niche. I really don't see the merit behind playing the Kashtira monsters right now, but they're not terrible pretty much ever. Unicorn is pretty solid, just being able to, like, banish cards from the extra deck. Being able to banish cards face down is also fairly decent, but they also just kind of die to everything. Like, if they activate their effect in order to search or in order to do a thing, Detonator can just leave them alone, or, you know, remove them from the field. And as far as Malice goes, they don't really care. They have a bunch of trap cards. That is how they get most of their interactions. So having a guy that banishes face-up cards isn't exactly great. And they also have, you know, Malice also has access to, like, Topologic Bomber Dragon if they want, or Firewall Dragon, or the list goes on. So it's not like they have no options with which to deal with the Kashtira cards. Okay, let's talk about the Mulcharmies. Mulcharmies hold a very interesting spot in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel in the fact that because you don't have the ability to side deck them out, and you have to play them in both going first and going second matches, they have to be either really good going second, or they have to hold some other purpose, right? And for the most part, that's not really the case right now. Yes, theoretically, they are a 4, you could normal summon the 4, and then you have, like, a 4 that you could use with Ryziel. In theory, that is the case. In reality, most of the time, they're just a dead card in your hand. However, are they good enough to actually be playable? And the answer is, not unless you're actually blinding second. As of right now, I really don't think that they are actually that good of an option. Even Fool Loss. Yes, I know that sounds crazy, but the thing is, almost every single one of the decks, well, okay, more specifically, no, yeah, almost every single one of the top decks right now has a very good line under Fool Loss. Yes, if you were to start with something like Ice in Ryziel, at the most you're getting 2 draws, which is fairly solid, right? You basically activated Pot of Greed. That's pretty solid, right? But if the opponent doesn't start with Ice, which is arguably more likely, it's not going to do a whole lot because they can just make Detonator anyway, or they could make Baguska, or they could do something else of that nature, giving you the 1 draw and then passing the turn on pretty much a similar end board. On top of that, I know this sounds weird, but even Malice has a good line through Fool Loss, which means that you basically just make Heart Scriptor. You just summon all your guys, and then you make Heart Scriptor with the, you know, the draws and all of that stuff that you got off of Chessie Cat and off of, well, mostly just Chessie Cat. And then, you know, if you have, like, a March Hare or something else of that nature, there you go. You get to play the game on the opponent's turn as well, and you still have Heart Scriptor, which is pretty solid. So, all in all, it's not exceptional right now. I'm gonna move Fua up a little, though. But for the most part, the other two are also not great options. They're fine. They do have the ability to draw you cards, but again, because of the fact that you also have to include them in your deck, guaranteed, when you go first. There are a lot of times where if you end up seeing them, even though Peruli is like really, really solid against Ryzeal and has the ability to draw you a ton of cards, or at least shut down their turn, because a lot of the summons, specifically in Ryzeal, are from the hand, it still doesn't really matter, because against Ryzeal, it's great, and against Malice, it's terrible, and against a bunch of other decks, it's not great. And going first, it's not great. But it's also an option. And same thing with Meowls, but in reverse, where it's like, Meowls is very good against Malice and terrible against Ryzeal. Moving on. Next we have Nib. Nib is actually not all it's cracked up to be, I would say. In theory, Nib deals with both Ryzeal and Malice. In practice, that never happens. And the reason I say this is because Ryzeal has a very consistent line, has like several consistent lines, to put a negate onto the board before Nib is able to be activated. And Malice has the ability to consistently play around Nibiru by just having the trap cards that can banish and bring back a guy that, you know, going into Apo and just kind of like punishing them. This similarly to how Snake Eye used to, where it's like, oh, I'll just do another combo, right? So that is kind of how it works. It doesn't feel great to play, but it also does feel kind of necessary, because if you don't end up playing against Ryzeal or Malice, and you play against some other tertiary deck that is on the fringe of playability, or that's like trying to FTK or something else of that nature, like Six Sam or like Gimmick Puppet or something of that nature, yeah, Nibiru's crazy and just kind of ends their turn, which is very solid. Pink's not really worth it. Neither is Raigeki. Sales Ban is pretty terrible. The trap card that does stuff by preventing the opponent from summoning guys, or Blackout Laughs. There we go. Not very good. I played against someone who was playing these cards today. They were just like playing a whole bunch of like auto win go first cards. And they were it was terrible. It was very bad, because yes, you could play like Judgment or something like that to win going first, but dear Lanta, imagine going second with that deck. Anyway, next up we have Crossout. Crossout, I think, is honestly okay. I don't think it's an auto-include in decks right now. And mostly the reason that I say this is because, yes, being able to like banish Maxi and all of that stuff is nice, but I think just having more hand traps in Malice, or having like board breakers or something of that nature in Ryzeal, is arguably more important, right? Crossout's not bad though. It, you know, in the mirror match, which you will likely play if you're playing one of the top two decks, it's pretty solid. And it's like an auto include, but I don't think every deck is necessarily playing that mirror match, and against those decks in particular, you're not really too concerned about, you know, Crossout. I don't know, Maxi is just that problematic, isn't it, though? Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Floodgate, bad. Yeah, if you can play Shifter, you should probably be playing, well, actually, Shifter's not that great right now. You might not even want to necessarily play Shifter. That sounds really strange. Let me explain. If you are playing Malice, Malice is not great under Shifter itself. It's similar in nature to like when Tenpai was playing Shifter, which is that, yes, you can play under Shifter, but you actually prefer having your graveyard, because you gain access to like all of the cyber stuff with Malice to just do your combo through the grave. You get things like the Bestials and what have you. So it's actually a hindrance to have Shifter as opposed to not having Shifter, right? But it does allow you to cut the opponent off of a lot of different things by activating Shifter and then forcing them to play under Shifter. That being said, Ryzeal also doesn't necessarily lose to Shifter, because it can just, you know, normal summon Ice and still do the combo that it needs to, right? So it's not exactly like a death sentence to Ryzeal, which is something of note. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, yeah, there you go. For the most part, I think that the metagame, it's kind of interesting how good things like Ghost Ogre are, and like how bad things like Nib are. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that people have started to understand how to play around Nibiru. However, that being said, people are stopping their anti-Nibiru lines and are starting to get more and more greedy. So maybe consider playing Nibiru more often, and people might get a little bit more greedy and end up dying to Nibiru. So there's that. But for the most part, it's kind of interesting how terrible a lot of cards end up being due to the fact that there are two extremely powerful top decks that are like on two very different axes. So there's that. Anyway, I'm going to call it quits there. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, a like is very much appreciated. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye.